The television courtroom had never witnessed privilege so pure and unfiltered collide so completely with its own destruction. Madison Whitmore, a 19-year-old with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and a designer outfit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, sat in the defendant's chair, radiating smug superiority. It was the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences in her life. Her manicured nails drummed impatiently against the armrest. Her lips curled into a condescending smirk that told everyone watching she believed this was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, one her father's name would make disappear. She had no idea she was sitting across from Judge Judy Shinlin, a woman who had spent 25 years dismantling entitled behavior long before Madison was born. She also had no idea that what she was about to say would trigger the fastest and most brutal takedown in courtroom television history. The words were already forming on her perfectly glossed lips. As her mouth opened, she delivered the sentence that would destroy her father's political career, bankrupt her family, and turn her into the most hated teenager in America. "My dad is the governor. You can't do this to me." The silence that followed was nuclear. Every person in the courtroom felt the atmosphere shift from professional proceedings to something far more dangerous, something that would be replayed millions of times across every social media platform imaginable. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed into the infamous death stare that had reduced seasoned attorneys to silence on national television. It was an expression of controlled fury that made one thing clear: your world was about to end. What happened in the next 15 seconds would become the most viral courtroom moment in internet history. A response so devastating and so precisely delivered that it would be studied in law schools and shared endlessly by people eager to see entitlement finally meet accountability. Before revealing the exact 15-second response that destroyed this rich girl's life and ended her father's career, one thing must be understood. This wasn't just another courtroom case. It was the story of how a single moment of arrogance cost a family everything they had built over decades. Madison Whitmore had spent her entire life inside a bubble of privilege most people could never imagine. She was the only daughter of Governor Robert Whitmore, a man who had climbed the political ladder over 20 years to reach the highest office in the state. From birth, Madison was surrounded by luxury, power, and access that convinced her she was fundamentally different from everyone else. She grew up in the governor's mansion with unlimited credit cards, a fleet of expensive cars at her disposal, and an army of staff members whose job was to make sure she never heard the word no. Her childhood was a parade of private schools with tuition higher than college, designer clothes worn once and discarded, and exclusive parties filled with political and social elites. By the time Madison turned 16 and received her driver's license, she had already absorbed the most dangerous lesson of all: the rules didn't apply to her. Her first car was a brand new BMW, a $75,000 Sweet 16 gift. She totaled it within 3 months after rear-ending another vehicle while texting and driving. The other driver was prepared to call the police and press charges. Within 24 hours, the governor's chief of staff made the problem disappear through a quiet settlement and a non-disclosure agreement. Madison learned from that incident, but not the lesson her parents likely hoped for. She didn't become more careful or responsible. She learned that her father's power could erase consequences as long as there was enough money and influence. Over the next 3 years, Madison was involved in 6 more car accidents. Each followed the same pattern: reckless behavior, followed by her father's office quietly making the problem vanish before it could threaten his career or her lifestyle. The incident that finally brought Madison Whitmore into Judge Judy's courtroom happened on a sunny Tuesday afternoon in March, and it would be the one mistake money and influence couldn't erase. Madison was driving her third car, an $85,000 Mercedes G-Wagon she received as a college enrollment gift. despite barely attending classes at her expensive private university. She sped through a shopping center parking lot at nearly 40 miles per hour in a clearly marked 15-mile-per-hour zone. Her phone was in one hand as she scrolled through Instagram, the other barely touching the steering wheel. She never saw the parked Honda Civic before, slamming into it with enough force to send her massive SUV lurching forward and spin the smaller car sideways into a light pole. The impact was devastating, turning a well-maintained 10-year-old vehicle into twisted metal and shattered glass. Madison sat in her SUV for about 10 seconds, checking her reflection to make sure she wasn't injured. Then she did something security cameras captured in crystal-clear high-definition. She laughed while looking at the destroyed car, said something to her friend in the passenger seat that made them both giggle, and then drove away without leaving information, without checking if anyone was hurt, and without taking any responsibility for the damage she had caused. The owner of the destroyed Honda Civic was Sarah Martinez, a 34-year-old single mother who had been inside the grocery store buying food for her 2 young children when Madison's reckless driving wiped out the only vehicle she owned. Sarah worked as an emergency room nurse at the county hospital, pulling double shifts and taking extra hours at a free clinic just to make ends meet and support her 6-year-old daughter and 8-year-old son. She had saved for 3 years to buy that Honda Civic, sacrificing every luxury and working holidays and weekends so she could afford reliable transportation, something that would get her to work and get her children to school safely. When Sarah walked out of the grocery store carrying her bags and saw her car completely totaled, her first emotion wasn't anger, it was terror. Without a car, she couldn't get to work. Without work, she couldn't pay rent or feed her children. In a single moment, Madison's carelessness threatened to unravel everything Sarah had spent years building for her family. She stood frozen in the parking lot, groceries scattered around her feet, staring at the wreckage of her life as her hands shook and tears streamed down her face. The security footage captured the entire incident clearly, including Madison's license plate. Within hours, police traced the vehicle to the governor's mansion. But what happened next revealed a pattern of corruption that went far beyond one spoiled teenager's reckless behavior. Before police could complete their report, before Sarah was even contacted by investigators, a lawyer from one of the state's most expensive firms appeared at Sarah's modest apartment. He arrived with a briefcase full of twinked documents and an offer he presented as if he were doing her a favor. The governor's office was prepared to pay her $5,000 in exchange for signing a settlement agreement and a non-disclosure agreement that would permanently prevent her from speaking publicly about the accident or Madison's involvement. $5,000 for a car that would cost at least $8,000 to replace. All she had to do was promise to stay silent. The lawyer made it clear this was a generous offer. Fighting the governor's family, he said, would be expensive and futile. Sarah should be grateful they were willing to help her at all. Sarah Martinez was exhausted, terrified, and desperate, but she wasn't stupid. Something about the lawyer's aggressive tone and the speed with which he appeared at her door made her uneasy. She asked for time to think about the offer. His friendly demeanor vanished instantly, replaced by something cold and threatening. He told her the offer was only available for 24 hours. Refusing it, he warned, would be a serious mistake. She should think very carefully about what was best for her children before making any rash decisions. That thinly veiled threat changed everything. Sarah had grown up poor. She had worked her way through nursing school while raising 2 children alone. She had faced aggressive patients and dangerous situations in the emergency room. She was not going to be intimidated by an expensive lawyer protecting a rich girl who had destroyed her property and fled the scene. That night, Sarah Martinez made a decision that would change everything. Instead of signing the settlement agreement, She began researching, and what she discovered made her blood run cold. She found local news stories about hit-and-run accidents involving luxury vehicles that had been quietly resolved without charges. She found social media posts from people asking whether anyone else had been pressured by lawyers, representing powerful families to sign non-disclosure agreements after accidents. A pattern emerged. Madison Whitmore had been doing this for years, and every victim had been paid into silence. Before the story could gain traction, Sarah reached out privately to 3 of those victims. What they told her was horrifying. One woman had been sideswiped on the highway and forced off the road, suffering injuries that required months of physical therapy. Another man had his truck destroyed when Madison ran a red light and T-boned him at an intersection. A third victim was an elderly couple whose car was struck in a parking garage before Madison sped away. Every one of them had been approached by the same law firm. Every one of them had been offered settlements that barely covered their losses. Every one of them had been threatened with costly legal battles if they refused to sign non-disclosure agreements, and every one of them had taken the money because they couldn't afford to fight a governor's office with unlimited resources and political power. But Sarah was different. She was tired of watching powerful people escape consequences while working families paid the price. Tired of being told that standing up for herself would only make things worse. Tired of a system designed to protect the privileged, while crushing everyone else with legal threats and financial pressure. She refused to sign the agreement. That's when the real harassment began. Within a week, Sarah started having problems at work. Anonymous complaints appeared at the hospital, accusing her of being rude to patients and making medication errors. None of it was true. She had worked there for 8 years with a spotless record and glowing reviews. Suddenly, she was pulled into investigation meetings. Written warnings appeared in her file. Whispers spread that she might face suspension or termination. She noticed a dark sedan parked outside her apartment building multiple times, clearly watching her. One day, her children came home from school and said a stranger had been asking their teachers questions about their family. The message was unmistakable. Drop the case. Accept the settlement. Or watch everything you've built be destroyed piece by piece. The pressure intensified when Sarah's supervisor called her into a private meeting and, with visible discomfort, suggested it might be in everyone's best interest if she reconsidered her position on the legal matter that was causing so much unnecessary stress. The supervisor wouldn't say it directly, but the implication was crystal clear. The governor's office had made calls. Pressure had been applied. And Sarah's job was now in jeopardy because she refused to let Madison Whitmore escape accountability for destroying her car, her life. Sarah's children started asking why the mean girl's daddy was trying to hurt them. Her 6-year-old daughter began having nightmares about bad men taking their mommy away. Her 8-year-old son started getting into fights at school because other kids teased him, saying his mom was in trouble with the governor. The emotional toll on her family was devastating. And there were nights when Sarah lay awake, wondering if she was being selfish by fighting back instead of taking the money and moving on. Everything changed when Sarah found an online support group for victims of hit-and-run accidents. She shared her story, Madison Whitmore, and the aggressive cover-up attempts by the governor's office. Her post was seen by a civil rights attorney named Marcus Webb, a man who had built his career fighting powerful families and corrupt officials who believed they were above the law. Marcus reached out to Sarah and offered to represent her pro bono, not because he needed the money, but because he was disgusted by the pattern in Madison's history and by the blatant abuse of power used to protect the governor's daughter from consequences. Marcus immediately filed a lawsuit against Madison Whitmore for the full cost of replacing Sarah's vehicle for lost wages from missed work. and for compensation related to the emotional distress caused by the harassment and intimidation Sarah had endured. He also sent copies of the evidence, including the security footage and the threatening communications from the governors, lawyer, to local news stations and investigative journalists who had been searching for exactly this kind of corruption story tied to the governor's administration. Within 48 hours of Marcus releasing the security footage to the press, the story went viral on local social media. The video of Madison laughing as she looked over the damage before driving away was shared thousands of times, with people expressing outrage at her entitlement and at the obvious attempt to bury the incident with money and intimidation. When producers from Judge Judy's show reached out to Marcus's web about bringing the case to national television, he knew immediately this was the platform Sarah needed. Judge Judy had a reputation for shredding entitled people who believed money and connections made them untouchable. Marcus believed that exposing Madison's behavior to millions of viewers would make it impossible for the governor's office to continue its cover-up campaign. Sarah was terrified by the idea of going on national television, worried about the scrutiny and the possibility of even more retaliation from even more powerful people. But Marcus convinced her that sunlight was the best disinfectant for corruption. Judge Judy's research team spent an entire week investigating Madison's history before the taping. What they uncovered was worse than anyone had suspected. They found all 7 previous accidents. They obtained copies of settlement agreements signed by earlier victims. They tracked down financial records showing that some settlement money had come from the governor's campaign funds, which was completely illegal. And they found text messages between Madison and her friends, where she openly mocked her victims and bragged about never facing consequences because of her father's position. Madison Whitmore had no idea how deep the investigation went when she arrived for the taping. She treated the entire thing like a fun day trip, an amusing story. She'd tell at parties about the time she went on a television court show. She posted Instagram stories from her hotel room, recording herself getting ready, trying on multiple designer outfits before settling on a Chanel suit that cost $3,200. She did her makeup while her friends made comments about how she was going to destroy this TV judge who didn't understand how the real world worked. Her father had hired Thomas Berkshire, an attorney who charged $800 an hour and who had successfully kept Madison out of trouble on all 7 previous occasions by aggressively threatening victims and making problems disappear before they became public scandals. Thomas had tried 4 separate times to get the case dismissed before it ever reached Judge Judy's courtroom, arguing everything from improper jurisdiction to filing technicalities. But every motion had been denied. He had even called in political favors to pressure the producers into dropping the case. But Judge Judy had built her entire career on being immune to that kind of influence. She made it clear Madison Whitmore would be held to the same standard as any defendant who walked through her courtroom doors. The atmosphere was electric when Madison entered with her entourage, her expensive attorney, her father's press secretary there for damage control, and 2 socialite friends who treated the whole thing like a fashion show instead of a legal proceeding. Madison wore designer sunglasses indoors. She carried a Gucci purse that cost more than Sarah's destroyed car. And she walked with the kind of confident stride that said she believed this would be over in 5 minutes with a ruling in her favor. She completely ignored Sarah Martinez in the waiting room. She didn't glance in her direction. Instead, she laughed loudly with her friends about their plans to go shopping after this boring court appearance was finished. She was loud enough for everyone to hear her say the whole thing was ridiculous, that the poor woman should have taken the money, and that her father's lawyers had already assured her television court shows weren't real. Courts and the rulings could be easily overturned. What? Madison didn't know what she couldn't have known. Inside her bubble of privilege was that Judge Judy Files had presided over 20,000 real cases during her 25 years as a family court judge in Manhattan before her television career. She had seen every kind of entitled person imaginable, and she had been waiting for a case like this to make an example that would be remembered for years. Judge Judy opened the proceedings with her signature no-sense approach, her voice cutting through the room with authority that made people sit up straighter. "Miss Martinez, you're suing Miss Whitmore for damages resulting from a hit-and-run accident where your vehicle was completely destroyed. Tell me what happened." Sarah's testimony was quiet and dignified. Her voice cracked slightly as she explained she had been inside a grocery store buying food for her children when Madison slammed into her parked car with enough force to total it. She described walking outside to find her only transportation destroyed. She explained how she had saved for 3 years to buy that Honda Civic, and she detailed the devastating impact on her ability to work and care for her two young children. She presented photos of the wrecked vehicle, medical bills tied to stress-related health issues, and a suspension notice from her hospital job that arrived immediately after she refused to sign the settlement agreement, and when Sarah spoke about her children, about the nightmares, the fear, and the questions about why the mean girl's daddy was trying to hurt them. Her voice broke completely, and tears streamed down her face. The audience sat in complete silence, captivated by the story of a woman trying to stand up to power and corruption while simply struggling to provide for her family. Judge Judy listened with the focused intensity that had made her a legend, asking clarifying questions and taking notes as Sarah spoke. With each detail of harassment and intimidation, the judge's expression hardened. Then it was Madison's turn. The shift in the courtroom atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. Madison strutted to the podium as if she were stepping onto a fashion runway rather than addressing a judge. Her designer heels clicked sharply against the floor, each step radiating aggressive confidence. She began with what was clearly a rehearsed apology, one that sounded about as sincere as a telemarketer reading from a script. "Your Honor, I want to start by saying I'm sorry that Miss Martinez's car was damaged. However, I think it's important to understand that this was just an unfortunate accident that could have happened to anyone." She immediately pivoted to blame Sarah, claiming the parking space was confusing, the lighting in that area was poor, and that she hadn't realized the damage was as severe as it turned out to be. Judge Judy interrupted her swiftly and sharply. "Miss Whitmore, I've seen the security footage. You were driving 40 miles per hour in a 15-mile-per-hour zone. You were looking at your phone. You struck a parked car with enough force to spin it into a light pole. Then you laughed, said something to your passenger, and drove away without leaving any information. Would you like to revise your statement about this being just an unfortunate accident?" The color drained slightly from Madison's face. Her attorney quickly jumped in, objecting to the admissibility of the footage and questioning whether the timestamp could be verified. Judge Judy shut him down instantly with a look that could have frozen lava. "Counselor, your client is 19 years old and perfectly capable of speaking for herself. Sit down and be quiet unless I ask you a direct question." Madison was visibly flustered now, her polished composure cracking as she realized this was not unfolding according to the plan her expensive lawyers had prepared. Judge Judy leaned forward, the posture longtime viewers recognized as the calm before devastation. "Miss Whitmore, is this your first car accident?" Madison hesitated, clearly calculating what Judge Judy already knew. She finally answered that she had been involved in a few minor incidents over the years, but nothing serious. Judge Judy's smile turned predatory. "A few minor incidents. Let's define a few, shall we? How many car accidents have you been involved in over the past 3 years?" Madison stammered that she didn't remember exactly. Maybe 2 or 3. Nothing worth discussing in detail, Judge. Judy opened a thick folder resting on her bench, the same folder that had made Madison's attorney visibly uneasy from the moment he noticed it. Try 7. Miss Whitmore. 7 accidents in 3 years. 7 victims whose vehicles you damaged. 7 settlement agreements paid by your father's office to make those victims go away quietly. The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers. Madison's face flushed from pale to deep red as Judge Judy continued her methodical dismantling. I have every settlement agreement right here. 6 previous victims. Total payout, $47,000. And here's what's particularly interesting: some of that money came from your father's campaign funds, which is an illegal misuse of political donations. Madison tried to interrupt, her voice rising with indignation, but Judge Judy stopped her with a single raised hand. Miss Whitmore, why did you leave the scene of this accident? Madison's answer revealed everything about her character and worldview. I didn't think it was that bad. It was just an old Honda. The audience's collective gasp echoed through the courtroom.